Hello, and thank you for joining us for Emerging Borders, exploring paths of innovation and entrepreneurship in Puerto Rico, in partnership with Invest Puerto Rico. We are excited to have you be a part of the conversation. You could submit questions for our speakers through Slido by clicking the Join the Conversation button located at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, or by going to slido.com from your mobile device and entering the event code #InvestPR. Now, please welcome to the stage Maneet Ahuja, Senior Editor, Forbes, for our welcome remarks.
Thank you, Juliana. I'm pleased to be here today. As the business landscape evolves globally, so has the opportunity for innovation and growth. Amidst the greatest entrepreneurial explosion in over 40 years, Puerto Rico has emerged as a value-rich destination to build and scale a business. As a result, Puerto Rico is the #1 economy in the Caribbean by GDP and is a hotbed for cutting-edge innovation across a variety of sectors, many of which you'll be hearing from today. Companies in these industries have not only leveraged the island's assets, but their presence also underscores Puerto Rico's leadership role in ushering in a new wave of industry innovation. Okay, let's dive right in.
Now for our panel conversation, please welcome Madhu Berrywal, Founder, President, and CEO, IEM. J. Robert Collins Jr., Chairman and CEO, Mercantile Bank International. Roderick T. Miller, CEO, Invest Puerto Rico. Ricardo Zayas, COO, Ocean Bio, and moderator Maneet Ahuja, Senior Editor, Forbes.
Thank you so much again, Juliana. So Roderick, let's start with you. As the world sought answers and a sustainable path forward through the global pandemic, Puerto Rico emerged as a solution. As the head of Invest Puerto Rico, what are some of the key reasons businesses are poised to thrive in this environment?
You know, it's an interesting, the global pandemic really accelerated the use of technologies that were already well into development and even elevated a set of values that many of us didn't even realize we had. From the focus on quality healthcare and healthcare solutions to environmental tech to even fintech, we saw these investments in these sectors accelerate coming out of the pandemic. The values related to these things, what the pandemic showed us is if you don't have quality healthcare, if you don't have security, if you're not able to manage even the environmental things well, that economies are going to suffer. And Puerto Rico was able to really take advantage of that because, of course, we know that the pharma sector, the pharma and medical device sector, really suffered tremendous challenges because of the supply chain being in Asia. And Puerto Rico really emerged as the only answer that could respond in terms of providing the capacity needed to make sure that Americans had access to the pharmaceutical and other supplies they needed. We've got over 90,000 jobs tied to the pharma sector on the island. We've got a 60-year history in the pharma sector. And of course, with companies like Ocean and others, we're seeing new technologies in pharma also finding Puerto Rico to be a right environment. And then, of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention, because we've got $100 billion in federal investment coming down the pipe over the next 10 years, we're seeing, innovative companies in things such as disaster recovery. We're seeing investments in things such as green tech and blue tech. So Puerto Rico's poised to win. And a lot of that has to do with, even prior to the pandemic, Puerto Rico had been putting in place measures to make sure that it was able to compete in terms of the caliber of talent that it had, in terms of smart investment, and in terms of smart public policy. And we at Invest Puerto Rico are really proud to be kind of the tip of the spear in bringing that investment to the island.
Yeah, and I think it's important to underscore that these are all long-term solutions. These are all long-term paths to innovation and growth, right? This $100 billion, this will be rolling out over the next several years, correct?
That's right. We're talking about over the next decade. And I think that's an important point to underscore. Puerto Rico, coming out of the hurricanes of 2017, and of course the earthquakes of 2019 and the financial crisis, those are big kind of systemic challenges. And Puerto Rico has made a very hard pivot by saying, what are the smart investments that we need to make so that our assets can compete on a global scale? And so we at Invest Puerto Rico are glad that there is that long-term view that thoughtfulness about we've actually got to not just compete for today, but we've got to compete for the long term. Of course, Puerto Rico has the most aggressive incentives in the entire country as it relates to relocation incentives and those sorts of things, and we leverage that. But I think what's much more important is that Puerto Rico has the right kind of vision about the economy that it wants to be, and its role kind of at the intersection of Latin America, North America, and the Caribbean. And I think that positions us uniquely to bring attractive, job-creating, innovative companies to the island that want to be a part of the direction we're moving in terms of changing the game as an investment destination.
Yeah, and also to underscore, I mean, the emphasis on infrastructure and development, that's kind of become in vogue in the last year or so during the pandemic, just from the economic side and also from the markets. And so Puerto Rico is pretty much ahead of the curve in that regard. So I'm curious, as a follow-up, what is Invest Puerto Rico doing to attract more business to the island? I know there's been a tremendous amount of influx in, but can you explain a little bit about how Invest Puerto Rico partners with the government to help businesses?
Yeah, Invest Puerto Rico has kind of a three-pronged strategy, if you will, around how we're trying to build a long-term future of the economy. Number one is kind of focused selling and focused promotion of the economy. So we've reached out to hundreds of companies around the globe, trying to share with them the value proposition of, because one of the things that companies need to know that this is a place where companies can thrive. Of course, with nearly 50% of our economy being in manufacturing and significant boost in investments in sectors such as fintech and professional services in recent years, Puerto Rico is a place where companies want to be once they know about us. So the first piece of our thing is, how do we actually tell the story aggressively? And of course, we've done a national campaign called Game Changers, where we've been in national media and international media sharing the story of why Puerto Rico is the place for game changers. We provide direct support to companies, though, in terms of identifying sites. So we, of course, know that as companies look to expand, they're looking for spaces that fit the needs of their company and their growth projections. We've been focused on talent. So many, of course, the number one driver of investment decisions by companies, can I find smart, healthy people that want to work? And Puerto Rico, of course, has those in droves. So how do we actually create those opportunities from a workforce perspective for companies? And of course, we provide navigation assistance, whether it's trying to figure out how to navigate the permit process or how to leverage Puerto Rico incentives. Our organization is keenly focused on helping companies have a turnkey and smooth transition in terms of investing and expanding to Puerto Rico. What we know for certain is that Puerto Rico is a market that's not just primed for growth, but is going to experience exponential growth in the coming years. And Invest Puerto Rico's aim is to work closely with the government, the Department of Economic Development and Commerce, a group of Guayacan, Endeavor, and all the local ecosystem partners to drive better outcomes for the economy and for the companies that invest here.
And what I love, from the journalistic perspective is that, Puerto Rico is kind of at this nexus, right, where we're seeing all these trends that have been accelerated by COVID, but are changing our economy and workforce, not temporarily, but permanently, right? This future of work, this migration, this great resignation, the acceleration of emphasis on certain industries like which we'll be speaking to today, really sets Puerto Rico up like well ahead of the curve from the infrastructure to all the other things we were talking about. But Bo, you are a celebrated innovator in the financial services industry. And in addition to many other impressive accomplishments, previously served as the president of the New York Mercantile Exchange. MBI was one of the first banks in the US to license custody digital assets. Can you talk a bit about being an innovator in the industry and how the business environment in Puerto Rico has helped with your business?
Yeah, so for a long time now, I'm going to date myself all the way back to probably 2000. I've been involved in substantial efforts to innovate around financial technology. And one of the things that drew me to Puerto Rico is realizing that the government here spent a great deal of effort and time and thoughtfulness in innovating around regulatory structure in a way that was not common at the time. So we saw an opportunity after looking at a number of jurisdictions to leverage the international financial entity laws, which have now been in place for 10 years, since 2012, I believe. And those laws incentivize us to become a very competitive international financial center, and serve the rest of the world in a US domicile on a US dollar-based system. So at the time that they created these incentive programs, there was really very little like this going on in the world. Mm-hmm. We've been able to leverage the creativity and thoughtfulness of the Puerto Rican government and regulators who created these programs.
And so blockchain technology and related applications have also risen in prominence globally as a new method of and way of doing business. As a central hub for innovation, where 1/3 of the GDP stems from finance and related industries, what are you seeing and expect to see more of in this regard in the region?
So the trend I think that we've embarked on from my perspective, which is, in the narrow field of financial services, the trend we've embarked on that's been encouraged locally is creating a zeitgeist or a hub, if you will, of knowledge and information. And we watched something like this happen as early as the early 90s, when you started seeing massive amounts of very, very smart people leave MIT, if you will, or Boston, and end up in Silicon Valley. They actually had a name for some of the flights. It was called the brain drain flights.
Wow, I love that.
Yeah, and so when you create knowledge hubs, there's a certain energy and transposition of information that occurs that's very difficult to replicate. So I believe I watched something similar to this happen in New York. Of course, that they've been developing their intellectual hub, if you will, for 200 years. We have a real opportunity to take advantage of what's happening in the fintech space and the blockchain space because of the various incentive programs that are here. There have been an enormous influx of very talented, very smart people who now find it easier to go meet in their homes instead of fly across the country and exchange, information via email and telephone. So I think the thing that we will discover 5 or 10 years from now is that Puerto Rico has become an intellectual hub for certain sectors of the financial services business, blockchain being a big one.
Mm-hmm. And Roderick, I'd love to get your thoughts on that as well, right? Because you have that overall big picture view, because you're seeing all of the movement, not just in one industry, but across all, and then also with your discussions and interactions on the ground and with the government.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the point that Bo hit that I would drive home is that talent is everything. And what we know is that what the pandemic has done is it's allowed the best talent from everywhere to be much more flexible in location. And what we're finding is that combination, of course, nobody argues with Puerto Rico as a place in terms of quality of life. And of course, it's got beautiful beaches and lifestyle and all that good stuff. But what is little known is that, of course, in 35 by 110 square miles, we have almost 90 universities.
Wow.
We've got the top producer of engineers going to NASA out of the University of Puerto Rico, Maya West. What's not known is that we've got 90,000 employees in the pharmaceutical sector. And so what we're seeing is that, and it's happening in pharma, it's happening in fintech, it's happening in AI and other sectors, is that the best and brightest are saying, oh, wow, here is an island where I can not only have a great lifestyle, but I can tap into a talent reserve that is often underutilized and underleveraged. And fortunately, Puerto Rico's #1 export is really smart people. We've had a brain drain challenge historically. And I think now the island is in a unique position to gain many of those folks back because of the new investment that we're seeing on the island, as well as the assets that we're continuing to develop on the island in terms of talent assets, but also in terms of physical spaces such as, such as the project, Ricardo's leading out in Aguadilla, or things that we see with the Polytechnic University or the Science City. So we've got these assets, these physical assets that are that are receiving massive reinvestment. And then we've got these talent assets that were little known and at about 30% less than what it costs in most places around the United States. And so that's a big part of our value, and companies across sectors are seeing that.
Those are such interesting points. I find that fascinating, right? Because usually once a central hub or a city kind of experiences brain drain, right, it's really hard to get that back. And we're, again, at this unique moment in our history as a nation and globally with the pandemic, to where we're seeing this flexibility we've never seen before. And that whole confluence of factors really underscores how Puerto Rico is poised to, come out ahead of the pack, so to speak. But so, Ricardo, I know that Roderick was, speaking to some of the stuff that you're doing. We've heard that gene and cell therapy is a growing industry within the region. Can you provide some insight into some of the opportunities that exist presently?
Sure. As Roderick said a while ago, Puerto Rico's been making pharmaceutical products and fine chemicals for the better part of the last 60 plus years. Cell and gene therapy is an area that's been untapped in Puerto Rico, even though many believe that it is one of the big pieces of the future of the pharmaceutical industry. That said, Ocean Bio, the company that I'm with right now, is actually building vector manufacturing, cell and gene therapy manufacturing facility in Puerto Rico, where everything can be done on that site, everything from R&D to preclinical and clinical manufacturing and studies, all the way to commercial manufacturing and biotechnology also, right? So our initial experience has been very good in terms of hiring people. We've got a pool already, more than 30 people here locally. And as Roderick was alluding to a while ago, there are literally hundreds, maybe thousands of very good scientists on the island and from the island in the United States that want to return to Puerto Rico if the opportunity is there. Just this morning, we made an offer to a scientist in California, Puerto Rican, a PhD in analytical chemistry and in molecular biology, and he's accepted, right? And as that, in the same light, we've hired about 15 people coming from the U.S. So we see our talent pool not only the 30,000 plus scientists that are graduated out of universities here in Puerto Rico, both on a bachelor's and a master's level, but it's extended to the 3, 4, 5 million people that are Puerto Ricans that are in the U.S. And a lot of them want to return to Puerto Rico if the opportunity is good. So we're tapping into a pool of local resources and U.S.-based Puerto Rican resources that really want to return. And what we're striving for is to create a significant hub of cell and gene therapy manufacturing here in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. So as we've already discussed, Puerto Rico has emerged as a burgeoning financial marketplace. Can you talk about some of the additional incentives from your vantage point to support this? And Roderick, would love to hear a little bit from you too on that front.
Sure, there are significant incentives. I mean, many people would argue that the incentives that are offered by Puerto Rico are some of the best incentives in the world to establish businesses here. So aside from the years of experience in manufacturing, to the talent pool, to the infrastructure, whether it's logistics or any of dozens of companies that can provide anything from facility design to startup and commercialization of pharmaceutical and biotech products, there are significant tax credits, whether they're in R&D tax credits, whether they're done here in Puerto Rico, whether the R&D is done here in Puerto Rico or abroad, you can tap into those tax credits. There are credits for actual capital spend, whether it's equipment or actually building or refurbishing a facility. Technology transfer, from wherever you bring in technology or products to Puerto Rico, there are incentives for that also. There are incentives for hiring people. So it's almost something you cannot say no to when you really start to dig into it.
And as a business owner, I mean, one of the problems that we hear a lot right now is business owners are dealing with this quote unquote great resignation, of which Puerto Rico's, it sounds like, and it is validated, is the beneficiary of some of that. But in terms of like wages and inflation, how are you handling that?
So what wages in Puerto Rico are typically lower than the U.S. because the cost of living is also lower in Puerto Rico than the U.S. And even though, as every other jurisdiction, every place around the world is being affected by higher inflation, we are also. But the wages are very competitive for us. That's one of the reasons we're able to actually build facilities, attract people, start facilities up at a lower cost than the US, because again, wages are a bit lower here, but also is the cost of living, which is a bit advantageous when you're starting up a business.
Yeah. So as somebody who's a hiring manager, and you all are, you're seeing a huge traffic of inbound and people accepting these offers, it sounds like.
Yeah, a lot of people do want to return. And I think that you touched on it a while ago, and so did Roderick. It's a good quality of life. And if on top of that, you offered a great business opportunity or a great job in what makes you passionate and the things that you like to do, it's a no-lose proposition.
I just have to chime in quickly on that. I mean, it's
No, that's
almost
great.
too good. It's almost too good to be true. I've actually told all of my friends who have kids or young adults that are under 30 that they all should consider Puerto Rico, because this is a place not only that's innovating, but it's also a place that's open to investment and folks from different backgrounds. And even if you look at this panel is very diverse, which is what I find to be my reality every day in Puerto Rico. And then when you talk about incentives, a 4%, income tax for a company that decides, that they want to export a good or service from Puerto Rico, you can't really beat that. Or the first $500,000 of income being tax-free for a young entrepreneur under the age of 35. Those are just examples on top of all of the other things that Ricardo's mentioned. So we've got not only an incentive structure that makes a lot of sense, but we've also got an environment where you've got $100 billion of federal investment, a great quality lifestyle, and a workforce that knows how to perform. And we find that it's 2 to 3%, recidivism in terms of employee dropout in Puerto Rico versus, on the mainland, those numbers are much higher. Which it says is
much higher.
When an earthquake happens in Puerto Rico, or some other event happens, or a pandemic, people in Puerto Rico, they value their jobs. So there might be a day of downtime, and the next day people are back to work, because Puerto Rican, the pride of Puerto Rican is this work ethic and is this ability to respond to challenges. And I think Puerto Rico has responded to challenges over now many decades and has shown its performance. And now it's coming out, I think, with new opportunities where other markets are recognizing that if they haven't had to respond to challenges before, now those challenges are emerging, and we already know how to respond to those.
Yeah, those are all great points. And I want to really quickly touch on venture capital, because I saw a stat on in the Invest Puerto Rico site that really shocked me in a positive way, that there are, I think, like 1,300 new VC firms in the region, which is unheard of in any other city across the country. Can you speak a little bit to that, as a method for innovation? And we're seeing this explosion in entrepreneurship with founders coming to the region.
So there are a few things I think that are essential to kind of really unpacking that and understanding it. I think one piece of it is that the incentive structure that's been placed in place, the fiscal code, if you will, that's been in place in Puerto Rico, is attractive to investors and allows investors to keep more of their earnings. And I think that's something that all investors seek to do. So I think that's a critical piece of that. The second piece of it is that investors are seeing the trends in terms of the types of companies that are moving here, in terms of the types of innovation that's happening on the island, in terms of the investment that's happening on the island. So literally every week, I have an investor or an investment firm or a PE firm from New York, Chicago, Boston, DC, California in my office, because what they say is, wow, we're looking at the trends of Puerto Rico, and the trends of Puerto Rico all suggest growth, that this is a growth market, that this is a market that has opportunity. And then I guess the final point that I will mention is, we even developed a platform called Impeller to connect local investors, to connect national investments to local companies, because we had such an influx of global investors that wanted to invest in the island. And so it's really a big piece of the value proposition now, is that there are all these investors here. And because it's an island, companies, emerging companies and established companies have relatively easy access to connect with these investors, whether it's through our platform or just through networking in the market. So investors are here, and we want more of them to come.
And so, Madhu, I apologize. I've been meaning to get to you. There's such a fascinating conversation. So I'm really excited to hear from you, because you're one of the most prominent business owners in the region and in the country. And resilience has been a big topic of mind for companies, particularly coming off the uncertainty and disruption that has impacted all industries over the past 2 years with the pandemic. How confident do you feel about how Puerto Rico is positioned to support the business community through these and other challenges to come?
Manita, I think that's a very important component of the story that Roderick is telling, and the story that Bo and Ricardo have mentioned. There is $100 billion of investment coming from the government, from FEMA, from the Housing and Urban Development Agency, as well as from the Department of Energy and additional other agencies. But this is a historic amount of funding. So I have been in business now for, as of yesterday, 37 years.
Wow.
And we are the largest company that's focused solely on crisis management in the United States. And so in all those 37 years, we have not seen this level of investment post-disaster in any location. And this money is going to flow to a lot of the critical infrastructure that's necessary for growth. And it's very, very important, $10 billion plus on energy, $4 billion plus on water and wastewater systems, healthcare, you name it, all of the various different critical infrastructures that is needed to form a business, sustain a business, grow a business, that we kind of take it for granted, but it's very important to have that investment. That investment money is coming in from these federal agencies, not just to rebuild back the way it used to be, but to rebuild better. So Puerto Rico has a historic opportunity to become the leader in resiliency and climate change in the 21st century, because with all this money coming in, there's an opportunity now to build the infrastructure of the future, not to be reliant on the 19th century infrastructure that we have in the rest of the mainland areas just because of when they were developed and when the infrastructure was actually put in. And on top of that, that is based on the 2017 hurricanes and then the 2020 earthquakes that occurred. But because of the pandemic, there's additional money that has come in from the CARES Act,
Right.
From the American Rescue Plan Act, and now the infrastructure bill that passed. So there are additional billions of dollars coming to Puerto Rico that can be used to leverage the funding coming from disaster recovery funds and to weave all of these together to really take the leadership on how do you build a resilient island, and there are many, many islands around the world that are dealing with this issue of climate change,
Right.
which is an existential issue when you are on an island. And how do you build the right kind of infrastructure that's resilient and agile in the face of the challenges that we are going to see in the coming decades? So I think this is a tremendous opportunity, and the public sector, the government has taken great notice of that and put in a lot of visionary ideas and concepts on what needs to be done. And this, starting this year, really is the time for execution. It's getting all of those projects in place, getting them started. I think the governor has come out and said that we want to have 2,000 projects start this year. So we're going to start to see all this money flowing rapidly into all of the critical infrastructure, as well as municipalities and many other parts of Puerto Rico.
And are there any takeaways? I know that this money is just being earmarked right now, but have these projects started to get underway, or are you expecting them to start happening later in the year? Or I'm curious to see if there are any takeaways or observations you've had about the type of infrastructure development that you're seeing over the next 2 to 3 years that will be furthering Puerto Rico as this great hub for business and culture and for people to migrate to long term.
So we are right at the cusp now of having a major boom in the construction phase of these projects. Unfortunately, it takes a little while on the federal programs to go through and do all the detailed damage assessments and the negotiations of how much money you're going to get for which part of the infrastructure. And most of that is behind us at this point now. So it's known for most of the major infrastructure projects how much money they will be. And there's agreement on what needs to be done. And I think we are now entering the very exciting phase of execution. So we should start to see the projects rolling out and probably just see cranes all over the sky, all over the island looking at, all the various transportation hubs, the water, wastewater systems, the energy grid for sure, but all of the various infrastructure, including healthcare, which is very, very important as we've learned over the last 2 years.
Extremely important. And the other interesting point, though, is like mostly with islands, right? So much of the global commerce or the lifeblood of the local economy is dependent on travel. And I really want to underscore that this is really just such a versatile ecosystem and corporate building environment. And so for companies considering relocating in Puerto Rico, which I'd love to hear from you, Madhu, but also some of the other panelists, what should they know about infrastructure and logistics capabilities?
Well, I'll just mention this because I've been on the island now since Hurricane Irma, 2017. The infrastructure, the physical infrastructure is getting all this $100 billion in investment. So that's going to be world-class. It's going to be 21st century infrastructure. But I think equally important is the human infrastructure, the human capital here. And I think that has been amazing. This is a hidden, latent gem that people don't necessarily know about. I have employees all over the country. We have offices all over the country, and I can tell you that the best of the Puerto Rico talent is world class, and it is, as you can put them against talent anywhere around from the United States or from other countries. They're dedicated, skilled, very professional, extremely motivated, and passionate about what they do. And I think that is a very, very important component of that. Because I think we have all mentioned it, the Great Resignation, and there is a huge talent shortage coming up. It's already there. I mean, we're seeing that. I can tell you that we have not had any resignations in our Puerto Rico office.
Wow.
So people are motivated to work, and they are there to do the work. But as we go forward and the talent shortage becomes more and more critical, people are going to look to locations where they can find these rich seams of talent, where there are people that have the skills and the knowledge and the desire to do work. And I think Puerto Rico is well placed for that. And then there's the other thing, which is the, sort of the borderless office. We don't, we had moved into our headquarters, newly furbished headquarters, with very poor timing in the spring of 2020, and then promptly shut it down when the pandemic occurred. And in this particular time frame, the employees have gotten used to, and I've gotten used to myself personally, working away from the office. And I don't know that you can put that genie back in the bottle again. Right. And so people are going to want to go where they have work-life balance, where they have an attractive environment to be in. And I was in Puerto Rico for 2 weeks, last couple of weeks, and I left snow and ice and traveled to Puerto Rico, and here's the balmy seas and beautiful weather and excellent food. And why would people not want to live there? Right. So I think that it's the talent on the island. It's the talent that left the island that can come back to the island, but it's also talent that is somewhere else in the country or the world that would like to live in a wonderful place.
Those are all excellent points. So in our last few minutes, I would love to hear some key takeaways that you think are important for our audience to know about innovation and entrepreneurial landscape in Puerto Rico. I like to finish most of our discussions with a quick lightning round. So Roderick, let's circle back to you.
Is that the world will never be the same. One of the key takeaways is that the world will never be the same again. And we know that. And there's this huge global shift happening in the economy, and that Puerto Rico is at the front end of it, with 95% of the island being an opportunity zone ripe for investment with world-class incentives and talent. Puerto Rico's positioned to win. And I would encourage anyone listening to reach out to my office directly at Invest Puerto Rico if you're considering expanding your business or moving to the island, because we can provide you with the resources that you need to make it for a smooth transition, but also to share additional information we weren't able to share in this call.
Awesome. Bo?
Yeah, I think we're at the cusp of a very exciting time where we're transitioning into a knowledge-based economy. And we have the precursors here to make that happen fast and effectively. The two things I think that are significant in that category are the collection of people who are great minds and innovators, many of whom are already here. And the other thing we haven't really discussed much, but we should say out loud, the technology infrastructure in Puerto Rico is amazing. It's far better than most people would assume that it is. And I can't emphasize what a key role that plays when you're standing up businesses in the knowledge-based economy. Mm-hmm. So I'm expecting to see further improvements in the tech infrastructure, and I'm absolutely certain that we're going to grow as an intellectual hub around all kinds of new innovative ideas.
Awesome. Ricardo?
Thank you. I've managed facilities all over the world for many years, regional, global, and I know the pharmaceutical and life sciences business very well because I've been at it for many years. And I can assure you that Puerto Rico is as sophisticated and as resourceful as any other country around the world. And in many cases, better. Some of my European and Asian colleagues might object, but I've managed, again, manufacturing facilities all over the world. And some of the best that I've ever touched and worked with are here on the island. Key being the people. I mean, it's been touched by every speaker here today, but I've worked both here in Puerto Rico and abroad for many years. And the resilience of the people here, the dedication of the people here, and the commitment to the companies that they work with, to me is unsurpassed. Yeah.
Incredible. Madhu?
Thank you, Vineet. I think that if you really look back in history, you could see that there was the Industrial Revolution that was a very major change in how people went from agrarian agriculture-based economies to an industrial economy. Then there's a change in the early 2000s, late 1990s, where we changed to a knowledge-based economy. And I think we are now going to a borderless digital economy, where you have traditional things like finance emerging in the fintech world. That you have AI and AI/ML and blockchain, and you have even advanced manufacturing. So it's a complete revolution. It's not an evolutionary process. It has been a revolutionary process, and we're just at the cusp of that right now. Roderick mentioned that the pandemic has accelerated these forces that were already there. But the pandemic has hyper-driven those forces. And I think we're going to see a lot faster evolution to this digital borderless economy over the next several years globally. And Puerto Rico is well poised to take advantage of that.
Well, that's a fantastic note to finish on today. I want to thank all of you guys for an excellent conversation.
What an enlightening discussion. We will now have closing remarks from Maneet Ahuja, Senior Editor, Forbes.
We'd like to thank Invest Puerto Rico for partnering with us on this event. I learned a lot today, and I'm sure you all have too. And if you're not thinking about moving to Puerto Rico already, I'm sure later today you will be. I continue to look forward to hearing more about all of the great innovation happening there. As we've seen, there's a tremendous amount of opportunity within the landscape. So lastly, I want to remind all of you to be sure to fill out your post-event survey, as we would love to hear your feedback. Thank you so much and have a great afternoon.